It's the feeling you can't shake off, a cold emptiness creeping into every corner of your life. You once had a family, a home, and a life full of shared moments, but now, it's as if the rug has been pulled out from under you. The moment my husband, Jake, got the news that he would be moving abroad for work, my whole world flipped upside down. What was supposed to be a new opportunity for him quickly turned into an overwhelming burden for me. As Jake prepared to leave, my mother-in-law, Catherine, took control of our home in ways I never saw coming. The very woman who once seemed like an occasional help now seemed like a force that threatened everything I thought was mine. I thought things would settle, but as Jake left, Catherine's grip on my life tightened, leaving me to wonder, how could things fall apart so quickly? Little did I know, the struggle for control would only escalate, leading me down a path I never expected. It started with small actions, but soon, I would be facing the hardest choice of my life. Before the move, life seemed stable, even comfortable. Jake and I had a beautiful little home, one that we had worked hard to afford. Catherine, my mother-in-law, lived with us, and though it wasn't always easy, we made it work. She was a presence in our lives, but it was manageable. I never imagined it would change. After all, family is supposed to be there for each other, right? We had our routines. Jake would work long hours, and I stayed home to take care of our young daughter, Lily. Catherine would occasionally lend a hand with the house, but it wasn't always consistent. I knew she had her struggles, her knee problems and the grief from losing her husband, but I thought that was just part of life. I had always tried to make her feel comfortable, treating her as part of our family, not just as a guest. Then, one day, everything changed. Jake received an offer to transfer abroad for a prestigious position. At first, it seemed like a dream, an opportunity for him to grow in his career. But as the excitement wore off, I started to feel the weight of the decision settling in. The move meant we would be separated. Jake would be away frequently, and I would be left alone with Catherine. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Would the distance between us change things? Could we handle the growing pressure of an ever-changing family dynamic? The storm of emotions brewing under the surface made it clear things weren't going to stay the same. Something was about to shift, but I couldn't yet see the full picture. The day Jake left for his new job abroad, everything changed. At first, it was subtle, small, almost unnoticeable shifts in Catherine's behavior. But soon, I realized that her presence in the house wasn't just as a family member anymore. It felt more like she was asserting her authority. She began to leave dishes around, ignore requests to help, and even subtly mock my efforts to keep things in order. I started to feel isolated in my own home. What disturbed me the most was how she would treat me when Jake wasn't around. She wasn't helping with Lily like she used to. Instead of making things easier, she made it harder, creating tension that I could no longer ignore. I remember asking her to rinse some dishes once, and she just apologized and walked away. It wasn't like her. She had always helped before, but now it felt as if she was intentionally making things difficult. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Maybe she was adjusting to the change, too. But soon, it was clear that something deeper was happening. When I'd ask her for help, she'd say, "I'll get to it," but never actually do it. Yet when Jake came home on rare occasions, she would eagerly clean up, doing everything perfectly. It was like she was playing a game with me, and I was losing. It was exhausting. I felt trapped between being a wife, a mother, and someone constantly battling for control in her own home. I began to wonder, was this just a coincidence, or was Catherine deliberately making my life more difficult? The stress of not knowing was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't just me who was suffering, it was Lily too. She could feel the tension in the air, and it was affecting her. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. The first major confrontation with Catherine happened on an afternoon that started like any other. Lily was napping, and I was cleaning up after lunch when Catherine came into the kitchen. At first, I thought she was going to ask about dinner, but instead, her tone shifted. She suddenly began criticizing how I was managing the house, suggesting I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't keeping things organized like I used to. My heart sank. This wasn't like her at all. We had never had this kind of argument. It felt as though the woman I thought I knew was replaced by a stranger. I tried to remain calm, asking her to speak to me respectfully. But Catherine didn't stop. She started accusing me of being incompetent and said that I couldn't handle things on my own. Her words felt like a slap, especially because I was trying so hard to keep everything together for Lily. Her face twisted in a way that made me feel small, as if I was being scolded like a child. I thought she was just upset, but the more she spoke, the more I realized she wasn't upset. She was controlling. Catherine was trying to make me feel like I couldn't manage without her, as if I were completely dependent on her approval. I felt confused, helpless, and scared. How could I have missed the signs? This wasn't just about household chores anymore. This was about power. I began to wonder, was this just the beginning of something much worse? My heart raced, and a small voice inside me whispered that I might be in real danger. Little did I know, this confrontation would only be the start of Catherine's reign over my life. It happened one evening, the night that truly opened my eyes to the depth of Catherine's control. I had planned to drop Lily off at my parents' house for a sleepover, a little break for me to catch up on things. I thought everything would be fine. But when I returned home, something was wrong. I reached the front door, only to find it locked. No sign of Catherine anywhere. I knocked and rang the doorbell, but there was nothing, not a sound. My heart began to race as I tried to stay calm. Maybe she was just in another room, I thought. But I waited and waited, and still, no one came to the door. Minutes turned into an hour, and I began to panic. I called Catherine's phone. It went straight to voicemail. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was unsettling. The realization hit me hard. Catherine had locked me out. Not just out of the house, but out of my own life. I tried calling Jake, but he was on a business trip abroad and couldn't help. I felt a cold wave of helplessness wash over me. This wasn't just about a locked door. It was a statement. Catherine had taken control, and I was nothing more than a stranger trying to get back into my own home. The exhaustion from everything, the constant strain of dealing with her, the stress of managing everything alone, and now this, became overwhelming. I could feel my eyes stinging from the tears I was desperately trying to hold back. Without my wallet or phone, I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I stood outside, shivering in the cold, feeling more lost than I ever had before. Something inside me broke. I couldn't let this continue. But what was I supposed to do? I thought the night would never end. But then, just when I was beginning to lose all hope, 2 police officers appeared out of the pouring rain. I could barely believe my eyes. They approached me slowly, their faces soft but serious, as if they knew exactly who I was. One officer called out, "Are you Emma? Is this your daughter, Lily?" I nodded, barely able to speak, my voice shaking. "Yes, that's us. But what are you doing here?" I asked, confused and exhausted beyond measure. They didn't answer my question directly, but asked me to come with them to the station. I hesitated, still unsure of what was happening. "The station?" I repeated, my mind swirling. I had no idea why they were involved, why they knew my name, or how they even found us in the first place. I was too tired to argue. They wrapped me and Lily in large towels to warm us up, assuring me that we would be okay. As we got into the patrol car, I couldn't stop asking myself, who knew what was going on? Who had contacted the police? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but the officer's calm demeanor offered a sliver of comfort. Something in my gut told me that whatever was happening now, it was just the beginning of the story. As I walked into the police station, still dazed and shivering, I was greeted by an unexpected face, Jake's uncle. I barely recognized him at first, but his presence was a relief. He explained that Jake had contacted him before his trip, suspecting that something was wrong with Catherine's behavior. He had asked his uncle to keep an eye on things, knowing how difficult things had been at home. My heart sank when I realized that Jake, even before leaving, had feared this situation would escalate. He had already warned his family about his mother's manipulative tendencies, but I had no idea. Jake's uncle shared that he had noticed the tension between us and had been trying to help without me knowing, but things had gotten worse faster than anyone anticipated. This new information was unsettling. I had no idea that Jake had seen the warning signs, but still left me to deal with it alone. The feeling of betrayal washed over me, but more than that, I realized just how much I didn't know about the depths of Catherine's control over the family. This was more than just a few disagreements. It was a deep, systemic issue that had been building for years. A few days after the police incident, Jake finally returned home, and it was time for the showdown I had been dreading. Sitting in our living room, I couldn't believe how surreal everything had become. Catherine was sitting stiffly across from me, as if nothing had happened, her arms crossed defensively. Jake was on the couch, looking torn and exhausted. He had barely been home for an hour, but it was clear that he was already caught in the middle of everything. I couldn't hold back anymore. Jake, I need you to understand what's been happening here. Your mother is out of control. I'm not safe, and neither is Lily. You have to make a decision. My voice trembled, but I stood my ground, refusing to let this go any longer. Jake looked at me, then at his mother, his face a mixture of confusion and guilt. Emma, I don't know what to believe. I've always known she was difficult, but I thought it would get better. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated and tired. You want me to just choose between you and my mom? I nodded firmly. I don't want to do this, Jake, but I can't live like this anymore. Your mother is manipulating everything, and I need you to see that. If you won't stand up for me, I'm out. I can't do this to our daughter anymore. Catherine shot me a look, her face tight with anger. What's all this drama about? I've done nothing wrong, she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. But Jake didn't respond right away. The tension between all of us was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing as I waited for Jake to finally make a decision. As the days passed, the weight of the situation hung heavy over our family. I could feel the pressure mounting. Jake and I hadn't had a full conversation about what to do next. He was caught between his loyalty to his mother and his responsibilities as a husband and father. He would go back and forth, torn between me and Catherine, not knowing where his allegiance should lie. Every time we talked about what to do, the tension grew. Finally, we sat down one evening, both exhausted from the back and forth, and tried to think clearly. Do we keep living like this? I asked, my voice shaky but resolute. Can we even make this work anymore? I was already mentally preparing myself for the worst, but I didn't want to give up without a fight. Jake rubbed his face, his expression pained. I don't know. I hate seeing you like this, Emma. I don't know if I can fix this, but I can't imagine living without my mom either. She's family. I shook my head, tears brimming. You don't get it. She's poisoning everything. She's tearing us apart. We can't keep pretending like this isn't a problem. The clock was ticking. We needed to decide, and fast. My biggest fear was for Lily. What was best for her? Growing up with this toxic environment was not an option, and I couldn't let it go on any longer. My mind raced. I knew that if we didn't make a decision now, the situation would only get worse. Would I have to leave? Was that the only solution left? Or could we find a way to rebuild, even if it meant making painful choices about family? The uncertainty was suffocating, and I was running out of time. The idea of placing Catherine in a care facility loomed large in our conversations. It was the only solution that seemed to make sense, but it felt like a betrayal. Jake was torn. He didn't want to abandon his mother, but he also knew that her behavior was beyond what he could manage. I could see the emotional toll it was taking on him, but I couldn't ignore the growing resentment inside me, the fear that this toxic environment was already damaging our family. Catherine, however, wasn't going to accept this decision without a fight. When the suggestion was made, she went ballistic. She screamed, called us ungrateful, and accused us of trying to lock her away because she was no longer useful. The emotional strain on both of us was overwhelming. My heart ached for her loneliness, but I also knew that we couldn't continue to let her poison our lives any longer. I was caught between my desire to respect Jake's family and my deep need to protect my own. As Jake and I talked late into the night, I knew that we had reached a turning point. Our choices were limited, and the only way to move forward, to heal, was to place Catherine in a facility where she could get the care she needed. But could we live with the guilt? The day we finally made the decision to send Catherine to the care facility, everything changed. It felt like a weight had lifted off our shoulders, but it was also crushing. Catherine's reaction was explosive. She didn't even try to hide her fury. She screamed, threw things, and accused me of taking her son away from her. Jake stood there, helpless, as his mother lashed out. I couldn't take it anymore. "This is for the best," I said, my voice shaking. "You need help, and I can't give it to you." It was the hardest thing I had ever said, but it was the truth. She didn't want help, not really. She wanted control. As the reality set in, I felt relief and guilt mixed together. The decision had been made, and we couldn't go back. Catherine would be placed in a facility, and we could finally start rebuilding. But there was no joy in this victory. Jake's sadness was palpable, and I knew that no matter how necessary the decision was, it would haunt him for a long time. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of finality. We had taken control of our own lives again. A few weeks later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, looking out at the sunrise. It felt like the beginning of something new, a fresh start for our family. Life in the care facility was still a difficult adjustment for Catherine, but that was her battle to fight now, not mine. I had finally learned that I couldn't sacrifice my own peace and happiness for someone who refused to change. Living with Jake and Lily in this new chapter felt different. We were free from the constant stress and fear of Catherine's control. Jake and I were more connected than ever, understanding each other in ways we hadn't before. I watched Lily play in the living room, so full of energy and innocence, and realized that I had done what was necessary for her future. As I looked ahead, I saw nothing but potential for growth, both for myself and for our family. I had learned valuable lessons about boundaries, family dynamics, and the importance of standing up for what was right. There was still a lot of work to do, but I knew that together, we could face anything that came our way. But even with all the relief, there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. Would Catherine ever truly accept this? Would our family heal fully? Only time would tell. But for now, we were on the path to a better life.